Welcome, everyone. We'll start in about 1 minute. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us to the Reshaping Europe Global Dialogue series. Delighted to have our second conversation this week as part of this series, this week with Ezio Manzini. Before I introduce Ezio, let me introduce myself. I'm the CEO and advancing the field of social innovation, but we work also with organizations to help them prepare for the challenges that we face ahead. As part of the work that we do at SIX, we've done a lot of work with the European Commission over the last decade, and currently one of the programs that we're working with is called ESIA, European Social Innovation Alliance, and we're setting up with dozens of other consortia and organizations across Europe a network of social innovation competence centers, one in every nation state in Europe, to help support the development of social innovation ecosystems and direct ESF money towards social innovation. So as part of this, we want to bring some inspiration, inject some new ideas into the European social innovation community. And we've invited some of our inspirational friends, some people from Europe, some people from around the world for our work as well. So this is challenging work that we will do, and I think having new inspiration is always really helpful on a Monday afternoon. So with that, I'd love to introduce Ezio, who actually needs no introduction. Many of you know him, the man of fame, sustainability. He holds many positions, but we should start with which is where he studied and spent a lot of his career, but he's also the chair professor at the University Arts in London, various other universities in China and all around the world, and also well known for founding the network DESI's, Design for Social Innovation Network, that has worked alongside SIX for many, many years. So Ezio, thank you for joining us. Today, you're going to talk a little bit more about some of the ideas in your most recent book, Livable Proximity, Ideas for the City That Cares. And no more than ever do we need a city and a society that cares. So thank you for joining us. And tell us.
You invite me. And, well, the task of inspiring the social innovation community is very tough. So I hope at least to bring some bits of ideas in the community.
Well, you've been doing it for many years, so we continue to.
Let's see if you succeed also this time.
So for those of you who know Ezio and I usually move away from some of the questions that I tell Ezio I'm going to ask, and I sometimes ask him some left field things. Today I will be doing that, but I will invite our participants to ask any questions below in Zoom. Please feel free to pop your questions in throughout, and if they feel relevant at the time, we'll ask Ezio, and if not, we'll do that at the end as well. So invitation to put your questions there, and we'll incorporate as much as we can in the next 50 minutes or so. So Ezia, let's start. Why is design important for our cities today? Tell us about cities and how we create these cities.
Well, this is a little bit embarrassing question for me, because I'm working as a designer, and I'm working as a researcher, and I am in this discipline of design. So if you ask why we designer, as I call them, us expert designers, are so important, it's a little bit embarrassing. So probably people will judge if a design could be important at the end of this conversation. But in any case, let's put it like this, given that you made a question. This is a very introductory question. Let's discuss about the city. It could be also for the overall society, but to make it more concrete, let's discuss about the city. That will be the topic of our next questions. The city and the society, and by the city in particular, is a kind of mesh of so many different subsystems. And in the past, the way of change was very long. So it took time to have changes. So apparently it was enough to design the buildings, and it was enough to define what is a city. And afterward, to be also design the planning of the city. And it appeared that all the other subsystems were in some way auto-organized, because they was redesigned, adjusted in this very slow change, following the tradition, mainly adapting what has already been done. But when the time accelerate, and when the change accelerate, and when in this change we have also to superpose another change that is the one needed to move toward a sustainable society and a sustainable city, all these other subsystems cannot simply evolve in a quasi-natural way, following how we have always done, but in some way, or in a way or the other, they have to be designed. So progressively, many other elements of our daily life entered in the focus of what has to be designed. So it started 1 century ago designing the product for the industry, but afterward they moved to design the communication, and afterward they moved to design the services, and to design the interface, and to design the digital platforms, and to design the strategies. So practically every single element that we can find in our daily life has to be designed. Of course, this design is in a very general way. So everybody designs. So everybody facing the need to imagine something that is not there and to find a way to make it happen, they are designing. But so the first step is that practically everybody, a single individual or as a community or as other kind of social actor, discover the need to think adopting a design approach to what they do. And all those people that are designing can be in some way supported by some expert that are the design expert, the one that having studied specifically issue about design and made a lot of experience, could help the process of co-design. So to make it short, when everything moves fast, everything should be designed. This design is done by everybody in a huge co-design processes, and the design expert can intervene to help with their own specific skill and capability to improve the quality and the effectiveness of these co-design processes. This is available for everything, included, of course, the city.
Thank you, Ezio. I think this is really helpful context, because you talk about when everything is moving faster and everything is changing quickly, which brings us, I think, to this this moment that we're in today. So tell us a little bit about this book and why you wrote this book now. why it's important now, and what design has to offer this challenging moment that we're in. Livable proximity.
Yeah. Yes, there is everything that happens in life. There is the very specific motivation in that moment that you start to say, okay, I want to do this, in this case, the book. And there is all the background, the prepared, the condition to do it. So the book is called, as has been said at the beginning, Livable Proximity, and talk about, as has been said, the city that care. And we are going to explain better what is the meaning of both the title and the subtitle. Let's say that the most immediate motivation has been that in Italy, but I'm sure everywhere, at least in Europe, but every place that I know, the COVID started a huge conversation about the reality and the future of the city. And therefore, different kind of hypotheses emerged, and there was a huge discussion. So I am a researcher on this topic, and therefore I felt that maybe I could bring some ideas. So the immediate motivation has been a huge international discussion about how we have to consider the present and the future of the city. But if I could write this book, is because before this moment in which I decided to take my computer and start to write, there has been several years of work of many people on different models of the city, and between the one that I'm going to present today. And in particular, has been mentioned by Luis that I founded, and now I participate to a network they call Design Basis Network. And we had a special focus of interest on what is called design for city making. And this focus of interest put together several schools that was working on what design can do in the city making in particular. And therefore we arrived to some, not final conclusion, but they say the discussion focused on something. And what we focus on was the idea that we desperately need to introduce a notion of care in the way in which we imagine and we also co-generate the city. So that one of the main problems, if you could, at least for me now, maybe I make it a little bit extreme, but if I have to say in one word, what is missing in the contemporary modern, so-called modern society and modern cities is care. Care in between people, and therefore we have people that suffer of loneliness, and we have people that are a kind of exploded society where the different social forms that existed before do not exist, and care for the environment, because we suppose that technology is solving the problem, and so we are detached from what are the impact of our action. So we arrived to this idea that the notion of care was really the fundamental notion on which to work. As you know, at least probably you know, many of you know, the notion of care is not new. It's not that we invented the importance of care. Just to say, because the credit has to be given, all the feminist movement has developed a lot of thoughts about care in all these dimensions of care since a decade now. But for some reason, this has been a discussion inside a certain arena of conversation, where now it happens that this notion of care, every possible definition of care, from the care towards somebody that is sick, toward the care as a kind of general relationship in between human beings that express an activity, or express before an activity, an attention one for the other one, and an attention that transforms itself in the possibility to do something. So this idea of care emerged much more, that has been in the debate of this that I said before. And we finally arrived to think that this was really the pillar on which to build a new idea of a city. But there is a big but, because care, being a relation in between people, cannot be designed. because you cannot oblige anybody to have care of somebody else, because care is empathy, willing to be open, etc., etc., etc. And therefore, we find a second step that has been, at least for me now, I don't want to bring all my colleagues in my thoughts, but we did it more or less together, that discussing about care, we found out somebody, particular an author that is called Maria Puig de la Bella Casa. They wrote a very important book that is called Matter of Care. And in between the many interesting things that she says care is by definition tactile. So you cannot have care if you do not touch the other ones, if there is no tactile relationships. And why is so important? Because in the world in which everything seems to be possible to be done, as we are doing now in a digital way, and she says, yes, you can organize, you can talk, you can think, you can make friends online, but if you want to really give or receive care, at a certain moment, you have to be close, physically close to the other ones, because we have bodies. And the bodies are what, at the end of the day, ask for care. I will add also, and also Maria Puig de la Bella Casa says, not only in between people, but also in between people and the environment or the network of life, as she says. So care necessarily asks for rethinking the topology of the bodies. So it's not, we spend a century using our technology, using our organization capability to say that everything could be done independently from where you are. You can work, you can study, you can make the family, you can do everything independently from the fact to be nearby. Well, before this technology was obvious that to make a family, to make a work, to make everything, people had to be nearby. So in the pre-modern society, proximity was obvious. But the modernity can be described in so many different ways. One of the ways could be, it has been an effort to use our technology and our organizational capability to detach, to separate, say, look, you can do everything. Also, if your body is not important. Well, this notion about care and this interpretation, that for me is the only real interpretation of care, reestablish that it's important where physically things are. And you can have a system of proximity that could be rich and diverse, with people that are near in between each other, near to the environment, or you can have a system of proximity that are desertified. Around you, you don't find anything, you don't find anybody, you don't find anything that can be enter in your life, and you enter in the life of these things. So why this is so important? But in part, I think that I already said, but it's also important for us because if care asks for closeness, it asks for proximity. So you practically, if you want to have a society that care, based on the notion of care, it cannot be other than being a society based on proximity. And if we talk about the city, if you want to have a city that care, you need a city based on the idea of proximity. You remember maybe what I just said. So a city that instead of being organized to separate the function, what the planner called the functional way you organize the city, the zoning, they say, and organizing that everybody can different way to live and can go to shop in one place, to bring the kids in another, and to live in a third place, etc. And afterwards, you use your car or your telephone to reconnect all this function. You have to try to use the technology and the potentiality and the organizational capability to rebring in for how is possible people together. And the good thing of proximity is that if we consider the meaning of proximity in all the languages, there are two meanings. in all the languages. There is the physical proximity, that means to be physically nearby, so to have the possibility to exchange something in this way. But there is also the human proximity, the relational proximity, that means to be near, open, empathic with the other ones. And this is, and I concluded this question, the answer to this question, this is why it's so interesting and, in my view, such a strong and generative concept for who, not only the designer, but for whoever want to design in a sustainable way a society or a city. Because if it is true that the care cannot be directly designed, and also the relational proximity that practically is care is not directly designable, you can design the proximity, the physical proximity. So you can reorganize the physical context in the way that there are possibility and the probability that people met, start conversation, and this conversation start to be open one to the other one, to trust one to the other one, and thanks to see this also start to have relations of care. So in practice, given that there's a double link between care and the relational proximity on one side and the physical proximity on the other side, we organize physically a city that make the relational proximity, that is care, possible and hopefully probable. Yeah.
Wow, Ezio, thank you. And what you've done so beautifully there is described how your title and your subtitle are in fact connected, and the story that brings them together. But I'm actually going to separate them for a bit again, just to go into the issues a little bit more deeply, because the outcome quite popular as a concept.
Sorry.
In the media, perhaps without the language of.
Louise, one moment. There are some, the audio is broken for me at least. So can you at least the central concept repeat it, because otherwise I answer to another question.
No problem. Let me repeat. I was just saying the concept of proximity in cities is quite popular. The idea of the 15-minute city has become a bit of a trend. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about this idea of proximity, and give us some examples of how you've seen this working in other places in Europe.
Yes. No, I like it to start because I think at least that I answered to your question, and I took it in a very general sense to say, when we talk about the change that we have to do, to think also to propose something practical toward a more sustainable society, integrally sustainable society, we cannot avoid also to have a more philosophical background. But of course, afterward, we have to see what practically it means and how it can be applied. So one of the motivations that brings this idea of the city of proximity in my language to be quite diffuse, I must say. So there are a lot of people that are discussing, and also cities that are taking it seriously. Is before there are some motivation, as I said before, the discussion about what is the city after the COVID, etc., how we can change the city toward a sustainable city. So what are the strategy to reimagine a city that could be more sustainable and resilient? But at the same time, it happens that this discussion, that is not a new discussion. In some way, some element of what I'm saying now, the discussion started some decades ago. But the acceleration in this discussion and the move of this discussion from being a discussion in between some expert toward a larger audience happened mainly for two reasons. The first one, I already said at least 2 times, that when there has been the COVID, the discussion about the city became very popular. So many people started to think what could be the city of the future. And there have been many different implications. But at the same time, it happened something that, if you want, is a communication, but it's a communication that was extremely effective. And is that the lady mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, decided 3 years ago to participate to the competition for being re-elected as mayor in Paris with the slogan that was the La Ville de Quart d'Heure, the 15-minute city. And in the moment that a big city as Paris, somebody took this strong position, this has been very effective. So it was something that really started to make the journalists and many people to start to say, oh, what is this 15-minute city? And try to imagine what it is and to discuss about it. And as a matter of fact, the 15-minute city is it's very simple to be said and very simple to be told and understood concept. Imagine a city in which practically everything you need is nearby to where you are. So less than 15 minutes on foot or in bike. And when you say this, everybody understands it. And this is very good. And given that it's a very strong claim, because it's one of those claims that I think that everyone can, after 30 seconds, understand more or less what we are talking about. And therefore, it's very strong. If normally, as you I've seen, because I start already talk about this since 10 minutes at least, I don't use it so much, is because it's a little bit limited. So I agree that it's very strong. It's a way to talk about what I call the functional or the operational proximity. But in some way, in the description, it loses other aspects that are very important. I don't say that are lost by probably the Anne Hidalgo, but in the normal discussion in the journal, it seems to be simply something to reorganize physically your life. That is simple, but it asks for a revolution to be done. In any case, in Paris, they started this idea, and this has been very important because afterward, people discovered that in reality, also in Barcelona, and maybe also from before, they had a different title. It was called the Superias, the city of the Superias, the city of the super blocks. And there are this project that was ongoing since more than 20 years and has been revamped by the lady mayor, also in that case, Ada Colau, that also bet a lot of its campaign to be mayor, to be re-elected as mayor on this superior concept. This is very similar. Afterward, maybe if we have time, I can also explain a little bit how they are, but also the superias, the super block concept. Talk about the city in which you recompose the function, you enrich and diversify the proximity system, that in this case are called super block, in the way that people can find many of the functions that are needed nearby, and also to have some social support that is organized nearby. So this is the very general title. So if you go to see, if you want, and to make your mind, if you are never, so practically what does it mean? In all the cases, I mentioned Paris, I mentioned Barcelona, I could say also some other historically very known city as Copenhagen, as somebody said at the end, is the mother of all the others. But also I could quote some example in Italy. We have, when there had been the election of the mayor some months ago, practically all the mayor was talking in some way about the city of the 15 minutes. Afterwards, it had to be seen how serious was this commitment. But in any case, the slogan, the idea came in the mind. The problem is that it's so simple to be understood, but so difficult to be done, because it is practically to move in the opposite direction in relation to what has been all the planning in the modernity. Afterward, of course, there are some cities, it can be said, that are already near to be city of the 15 minutes. In Italy, for instance, many of the city that also the tourists like so much, not the super tourists, because that one will already be changed, but this middle town in Italy are practically all city of the 50 minutes, less than 50 minutes, maybe 10 minutes city. But because this is still a remaining of the past, the new layer that has been built also in Italy and other places are not 50 minutes at all, are desertified. And therefore, the challenge is not to make the city of 50 minutes where it already exists, but to give value where it already exists, because it's a good chance, fantastic. But to extend this idea in the peripheries, in the place where it's not like this. This is what frequently the mayor that proposed this idea do not understand. And if you try to do it, immediately you recognize that is very difficult. So let's go back to Paris, because it's a very well-known one. For instance, beyond telling the story, beyond all of them normally work a lot on the traffic and changing mobility. And the main idea that is very well expressed in Barcelona is not so much to move from car to bicycle and public transportation, but to move from a space that is only for mobility to public space, to transform the streets in public space, in which, okay, there could be mobility, but there are also many other things that can happen. So all the cities that move in this direction have a chapter on reorganizing the mobility system. But afterward, let's take the example of Paris. It could be a little bit different if we go in Barcelona or if we go to Bologna, but let's take Paris because it's well known. You can have that the school that normally have a courtyard and normally are distributed in the city could open the courtyard, and the courtyard of the schools can become a kind of living center for, they say, the capital of the neighborhood. You can have the libraries that become not only the place where you go to read a center, but again, a center of cultural activities. You can have some policy to regenerate the shops of proximity. You know that the shops that are on the corner of the street are so important to generate a lively neighborhoods, and they are dying in many places. And they have an intervention to help the shops to exist, recognizing that a proximity shop is not only a place to sell things, but it's also a place in which there is reconnecting many different networks. It has been, in the case of Paris, also to reorganize the police at the level of the locally, in the way there is a different relationship in between who is supposed to take care of the security and the people. And the same for the treatment of the collection of garbage and the decor of the city, that you know that there is a place near to you that are the one in charge of your place. So all these things is trying to bring functions on the local space. And the same, as I forgot, one of the most important is to reorganize the welfare system, the social and the healthcare system, to reorganize it in the way that locally you have somebody that could be the one that is an interlocutor for you. So I hope that with this few examples, I gave you an idea of what practically does it mean to move from the very general vision of the city of the 15 minutes, or city of the proximity, toward implementing it with many different projects that could, each one of them, have their own individuality. So it's not a big machine that you have to do at once. You can create a frame that is this idea, and afterward, depending on the possibility, the resources, what you have as an opportunity, specific opportunities, you try to do what? To bring services near to the user and to create services that have a capability to promote a certain degree of participation. And therefore, putting all of them together, you enrich and diversify the system of proximity. And what, in my definition, is a livable proximity, that is the title, is exactly how to generate a system of proximity that are dense with many activities and diversified with a different activity that in some way answer to many questions that you can have in your life.
Ezio, thank you. So another layer, I guess, of lots of your work, and I think of these cities that we're talking about, and this concept of livable proximity is the role of citizens, and how we can, and you've already started to talk about this, but I wonder whether you might say a bit more around starting from the perspectives of citizens, but also bringing those citizens into the co-design, in particular when we're thinking about these, developing or designing a city that cares.
Yes, thank you, Louise, because this also brings us to the first question. Why here you have somebody that is not a planner and not an architect, and I'm talking about the city. And now, the city is probably the more complex entity that has been in some way generated through the human being capability, creativity, design capabilities, etc. And you can look at it by many different points of view. I say every complex entity, and each one of them is good and is useful. Now, let me simplify a little bit. The traditional way to look to the city for the planners is the so-called helicopter view. So normally the planners, what they do maps, because they look to the city from very high, they see the city as a whole, and they try to see different dynamics that happen at the level that you can see when you look at the city as a whole. I will say this is important. It's not important. It's very important. But if you look from the helicopter, you see what you can see from the helicopter, but you don't see what is happening in the street. You don't see what is happening in the shops. You don't see what is happening when people go to the garden. And therefore, if you see something that is very important, and this is already codified, and this is a normal kind of planning, you don't see the city making. So what happens of this complex mix layer of different socio-technical systems that goes together and generate the city. And given what we said at the beginning, that once upon a day when the change was low, you could have imagined that if you do a good plan, everything afterward will happen in a quasi-natural way, because it was not to change so much from what has been the business as usual or following the tradition. When things change in a faster way, it's not like this. So you have to change the point of view and to assume a point of view that is who is down to earth. And being down to earth, probably you don't see some very general change, but you see what happens at that level. So if you want the complementarity in between a traditional way of seeing what is the planner's role, a traditional way of saying what is the design role, is that the design that are not planners are accustomed to move to what has been called the user-centered design, so to start from the user. Now we prefer to say the life-centered design, because maybe it's not only an issue about user, but it's also an issue about the ecosystem in which you are immersed. But in any case, a point of view that is very down to earth inside the systems. And therefore, many of also the example that I did before talking about Paris, but I could use other example from other city, start from observation that you can do on the ground of what is happening, and not only what are the problems, but also what are the opportunities. And Louise, that is working since a long time on social innovation, we know that to have social innovation, we do not need only to look to the problems. We have to need also to who is doing something in a position, what are the resources, who are the ones that could mobilize themselves to do something. And this possibility to see the energies that are in the city, the resources that can come from individual and group of people, you can see only if you are really in between them, if you are down to earth, so you don't see it from the helicopter. And here is why there is different kind of projects that can only be done if you are inside the city, in the streets. And if you look around and if you find that not only use the reference to the citizens, not only to look to the problems, but also to look to the opportunities. If I take the example that I did before, let's say to transform the school in a center, not only to teach to the kids, but a kind of, as said in Paris, the capital of the neighborhoods. So this is to recognize what is the role of the school, what is also not only the more strictly speaking teaching to the kids, but the fact that it could be recognized as a very important place in the neighborhoods. And you can recognize that there are some resources because the school, they normally have some moment in which they are not used. So it's also an asset that is not totally used. This possibility to be used in moment in which is not used for the kids. And around this, you can create other kind of interest and how you can organize the parents, the relatives of the kids to play a role and maybe to do also something else. So you can create around the school many other activities. So in many places, for instance, if I take the example that I know better because it's in Milano, of one neighborhood that started to apply, not apply because they did it without asking to anybody. So it was totally spontaneous, but they behaved as a city of proximity. There have been nowadays maybe hundreds of different projects, but the beginning was around the school. It was around the school because the kids get out from the school and they was in the street with the car. And the parents, the mothers in particular, started to ask to create an area of respect. And this became a kind of new square that was not existing before. And the square was good for the kids, but if it was good for the kids, it was good also for others. And so this has been the beginning of the regenerating of this neighborhood. There was a very, not so poor maybe, but relatively poor and with a lot of difficulties. And this started regenerating something, starting from the school, and from the school regenerating the area around and showing that it was possible to do something else. And working on this, it became a neighborhood that is totally changed, even too much now that we have the opposite problem, that is how to avoid gentrification. But this is another issue that we can discuss in another moment. So for me, to be what I say, down to earth, that by the way, I quote Bruno Latour that died, that is one of the big personality that help us to think in this way. And he wrote a book that is called Down to Earth, and he says exactly this. You have to be really rooted in the reality to understand. And therefore, again, the body, the proximity that you have with the other ones.
Yes, thank you, Ezio. And I think, you know, that concept of down to earth is expressed in many, many different ways in social innovation around the world. And so it's definitely one of those seminal thoughts that I think guide a lot of our work. I want to ask you a really different question in a minute, but we have had a question in the chat that is going back to the notion of care and proximity. But someone has asked, Kadri has asked from Estonia, how the notion of care and proximity is expressed in sparsely populated areas, in rural areas. And how there's a different perspective between the rural and the urban. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, I have. So I am very well prepared because even though I deal with CT a lot in this connected situation, I live
Your previous book.
I live in the countryside, and I participate as an active citizen to something that is called the community of care, the building of the community of care. And the building of community of care in this sparse situation, because my village is not only one village, it's one village with many different frazioni, we say, sub-part, spread in a larger territory, as at the same time some more difficulties, because there is no, in the city, the density could be a problem, but could be also an opportunity. As a matter of fact, density is very important for sustainable society. But we have this more spread situation on the territory. But at the same time, everywhere, I think, this little bit of a village spread maintain some remain of the pre-modern society, where the communities existed, and they existed in a kind of natural way, taking care one of the other ones. So to make a long story short, but if this person send me an email, I can send something more. Something more. Let's say it's possible to reimagine how to build a community of care, putting together some elements that exist from the past, but they are declining, and trying to connect them. So we create a very super simple digital platform to try to connect them, and afterward to connect them with the social and health and social service system that, by the way, in the region where I am, is already very interesting, because it goes in this direction, that is to have what is called the le case della comunità, the whole home of communities, that are the territorial articulation of the healthcare system. But what we are trying to do is to connect the professional community of caregivers and with people that are in some way organized in between each other, and to create what could be the community of care for the overall place in which we are. So maybe I don't pretend this was clear. I understand now, but I decided, or with Louise, we started to talk about cities, just to not to maintain too much open. But for sure, it will be possible, not exactly in the same way, but using the same concept, basic concept, to articulate in situations that are not the urban, but are the rural. And the rural have a lot of problems also, but there are also some resources. And before I was trying to explain which kind of resources we are trying to use to rebuild a community of care.
Thank you, Ezio. Yeah, and we can absolutely connect you afterwards if you want to have a further conversation or learn a bit more about some of Ezio's other work for that. Ezio, in the last few minutes, I'd like to ask you something a little bit different, because we started talking about why you've written this book now. It's because things are changing very quickly, and you as a researcher would, of course, want to understand this current moment, and connect it into your concept of care as well. This current moment is different to the moment that we had when you started working on this around when we were in the middle of the COVID pandemic, at least in Europe, less so now. But the world is changing again, and in Europe, what is so at the front of all of our minds, work, life, is the war in Ukraine. But we see this in other parts of the world, that that we have this increasing polarization that we're living with. And so I wonder how your concept of proximity and thinking about care as well can become and the role of design can become a contribution to designing for peace.
Well, yes, of course.
And maybe this is your next book. So we will start with some of your thoughts on this and go forward after.
I heartily thank you for this last, I think this is last, in any case, for this question.
This is your last question, absolutely. We only have a question.
Because it brings us a little bit out from the more precise discussion that he was doing before. But for me, it's really needed not to have a meeting. This one is not a conference, it's a conversation, it's online, etc. Beyond or not considering the situation in which we are. So we, my generation, have been so lucky to live in a moment in which, okay, there was war, but we have not the perception that the war was so near, and not only a perception, the reality that it was so dangerous. And now we are in a crisis that has never been so dangerous as it is today. So I think that we cannot discuss of any issue without, in some way, at least make a reference to the special conditions in which we are. And therefore, it's true that me, as many of us, we knew that there was war in the world, but we had the possibility to talk. We have so many crises to talk about and solutions to try to find that, as a matter of fact, me, for instance, dealt with the crisis of the migrants, etc., but I've never before taken the issue about what does it mean, war and peace, for me personally and for design in general. And now we are obliged. It's true, as Louise said, when I wrote the book, even though there was so many wars in any case, but not this one with the characters of this one. So the book is not referred to war and peace. But this notion of proximity, in my view, is so generative that can help also not to find a solution because it's not an issue that you can find a solution like this, but at least to give a direction. So let me say two things very shortly, but also this one, maybe not, I don't know, I don't think it will be a book, but it could be another conversation, a conversation about social innovation and building, my title will be Social Innovation and Building Context of Peace. Because to say only the title, war and peace are not something that you switch and you can have war or you can have peace. They are the result of a social construction. And the social construction, in turn, is done by many different actions that generate the condition for war. The condition for war is to create distance in between people. So to have the possibility to push many people, 100,000 of people, to shoot to somebody else, to kill somebody else, is that somebody else has not to be a human being as you. It's the enemy. And the enemy is not a human being. The enemy is seen as somebody very far away and is the enemy. So the construction of the condition for war means to build walls, physical or mental walls that separate people. And of course, the construction of the condition to have peace, not the perfect peace that will never exist, but a condition in which it is more probable to have peace, is to build bridges, to connect, and therefore in some way to generate some proximity. Because if the enemy is so near to you that you see this person in the eyes, you recognize that it's a human being as you. And I think that this is what we should do. We should find a way, imaginative, creative way to maintain this kind of connection, to destroy the walls and to try to build bridges. And in some way, to build bridges means opportunities. So you find again the two elements that I try to summarize in the proximity. So the physical and the relational. So I have to create opportunity to meet each other, and in this opportunity to create motivation for relationships. So, for instance, the network in which I am very small. No, it's not so small, but it's very light, let's say. And so we are not so powerful. But I think that we have being international, we have the responsibility to maintain an open table of discussion. And so I don't know what is the policy of SIX by this point of view, but I hope that also SIX as an international organization should maintain. This do not mean that I am not condemn the war of Mr. Putin, because I do, but I have to try to maintain that it's not a general Russophobia, but we should try to maintain the relationships that are the one that in some way the war has to finish, and we have to try to build the condition of peace. So I think that each one of us can try to make some effort to find how to maintain bridges, open relationships, and in some way to create proximity. So even though I did not have this issue in my mind when I started to work on this concept, today I think that it could be also a generative concept, also by this very dramatic point of view.
Ezio, thank you for that final thought. I think that's certainly a conversation that we need to continue to have. So really appreciate you adding that at the end. I want to say thank you to you for your time today, for inspiring us and giving us a lot to think about. There were questions coming in, one from Simona, but you know Simona, so she can ask you at another point. But she was asking if you had to start inspiring a new generation of professionals, if you had to start a new school, what would the subjects that we would have in the curriculum? I'm not going to let you answer that now, but think about that. Maybe this topic of polarization and peace is one. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Your book is available, and we're going to put it on the screen. Or in a chat function, you can see exclusive 20% discount. We will be having our next session as part of this series on the 6th of December, where we'll be talking to Christian Besson from the Danish Design Center, formerly Mind Lab in Denmark. And we're going to talk to him about his new book, which is Stretching the Future by Design. So please join us for the session with Christian Besson. We'll send you an email afterwards to invite you. And for now, please do buy Ezio's book. If you liked what you heard, I can highly recommend it. It's not too long, and full of lots and lots of great examples. So get your 20% discount and have some reading for the weekend. Ezio, thank you for your time. We'll see you again soon. Take care. Thank you, everyone.